on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Bobby Scott coming up momentarily, and we're really, really, really looking forward to every Labor Day. We go to the Bobby Scott picnic. It is so cool. It's at his mother's house right in Newport News on the river. We have such a great time, and it's a good, fun time for all. And, of course, Bobby's got big-time Democrats. He's got all the Democrat candidates there, all his Democrat friends. And Ann, my wife and I, Ann, and my son Joseph come fully dressed out in our Trump garb. And I have to say, everybody treats us so great. We have such a good time there. It's a fun picnic that Bobby Scott has on Labor Day. And we meet some fun people, and I get to get my picture taken with dignitaries that go there, like my friend Louise Lucas and others. We have a lot of fun. It's a great event that he puts on, and he invites everybody. There's hamburgers and hot dogs, and he's been doing it forever. One time he had Bill Clinton here when he was president, so it's just a fun time. And, of course, Bobby Scott is my congressman, so, I'm one of his constituents, so that's good also. And he's joining us now, Congressman Bobby Scott, Chairman Education, and he is with us now. Congressman, great to have you with us.
Thank you, John. It's nice to be with you again.
I can't wait till your picnic on Monday, and we always have such a good time. It's a fun time, and it's politics and all that, but everybody that comes is so nice. And even though we're on the other side, and I've got my Trump hat on, and Ann's got her Trump shirt on, we always have a lot of fun with that, and you're very gracious, sir, in having us. Thank you.
Well, we've had great success with it. I had the first one when I ran for the House of Delegates in 1977, and this will be the 43rd Labor Day cookout that we've had. And like you said, it's a great day. A lot of it, unfortunately, depends on the weather.
Right.
We've had 43, two have been rained out, and one got rained on. So we've got a pretty good percentage, but you never know. And the hurricane coming up may affect the weather. We don't expect the hurricane would be in Florida on Labor Day, but it often affects the weather all up the East Coast.
One time I think you moved it inside, and that was fun. We kind of figure out, unless you got a really bad storm, we kind of figured out. But I appreciate you're having it. It's just a great event for everybody, and I can't wait. It's always a fun time, and you always have all the big time Democrats, of course, including yourself, show up. And of course, I just want to share this with my listeners. The first one you were running for the House of Delegates, and so there's always a sign you put out from your first race. Big sign that you had, vote Bobby Scott for delegate or whatever. And it was back then, sir. You were a little bit younger, but you had an afro. And so, every time I look at that picture, ago. I laugh. You had this huge afro going on, and I don't know how old you were back then when you were, but it's.
I was 30.
Yeah, 30. Yes, you had the huge afro. So it's always just coming and seeing that poster.
I'd like to see your picture 43 years ago.
I was a lot thinner than I am right now, and I had hair. I probably wished I could have had an afro, but yeah, I was a lot thinner, I can tell you that, 43 years ago. Bobby Scott, so Congressman, we got a lot to cover today in a short period of time. Let's go to the G7. I thought the president had a great G7 meeting. Fake news media classified it as a disaster. What say you?
Well, I think one of the things that happens is that everybody would like to be working together, and just about everything that came up, we were by ourselves. He wanted Russia to rejoin. Nobody else did. Everybody wanted to talk about climate change. He didn't. So I'm not sure how much really got accomplished, but it's good to have the organization meet, and so like I said, I don't know what much got accomplished.
Well, he made a great trade deal with Japan, bilateral.
Well, if it's a G7, you're supposed to be working together, and that's the whole point of it.
Well, that was a sidebar meeting. I mean, the two of them were there, and he made a deal, right? I mean, that benefits American farmers, right? It benefits Americans.
Well, we'll see what happens to the farmers. He's spent the better part of $30 billion bailing them out because of his haphazard tariff wars.
Don't you think?
We'll just see how that happens. The stock market has been erratic to a large extent because of the uncertainty about tariffs. So we'll just have to see how that works out.
Don't you want to get the supply chain of production back in the United States and out of China for jobs?
Yeah, I'd like to, but with the way he's doing it, farmers would be bankrupt if they hadn't been bailed out to the tune of tens of billions of dollars already. I mean, he's only been in office 2 years, and the tariff wars have had a devastating effect on farmers when they lose the business. And one of the problems is that when you lose your export, the people you had been exporting to learn other people that can do just as well and establish business relationships with other countries, and that business can be lost forever.
Well, we've had 7 presidents get rolled by the Chinese stealing our stuff blind and flooding our markets with subsidized produced goods and destroying American jobs and manufacturing. Both sides of the aisle, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, you name it, George H. Bush, George W. Bush, Obama, nobody did a damn thing. Finally, we got a president who's standing up to China and trying to bring.
And they didn't have to bail out. And they didn't have to bail out the farmers to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, but you
prevent them all from going bankrupt.
I know, but eventually, if you can break this, like Trump is trying to do, and you can get the supply chain back in the U.S., it's worth it.
We're in the middle of it now. He says he's going to break it. The farmers are going broke. Only held afloat about tens of billions of dollars worth of subsidies. Otherwise, they'd be all out of business. If we can get through this and get to the other end, maybe it'll work out. You ask the farmers where they would be without tens of billions of dollars in subsidies, and obviously it has a cost to it. And as they lose the business, there'll be a question of whether they can reestablish their old business ties to stay in business. And we don't know. We do know that he is needed to call on tens of billions of dollars of subsidies to protect people from his strategy.
Well, though, in the recent polling numbers and surveys that have come out, 79% of farmers still back the president because I think they see the long-term strategy is benefiting them. And so that's why I think we're in good shape.
Ask them if they would still support him if they hadn't gotten tens of billions of dollars worth of subsidies.
No, but I would rather give them the tens of billions of dollars of subsidies and take a shot to get our supply chain and manufacturing back in the United States and have them stop stealing our stuff that they've been doing since Richard Nixon went there.
Let's see how it works out.
All right, well, let's get to the USMCA. You're a level-headed congressman. I mean, you try to do the right thing. That's why I have such respect for you personally and professionally, and I'm proud that you're my congressman. Let me ask you this, Congressman Scott. Why can't we get USMCA, this trade deal, on the floor of the House so we can vote it up or down? Because the same farmers that you're talking about, dairy farmers, those that produce timber and lumber and others, saying that passage of the USMCA now would benefit them. Why is it bottled up? Why can't we get it to the floor?
Well, they're still working out the details. I don't think there's a final version of it yet. Mexico, I understand, had to pass legislation on their side. I think that legislation is just about done, but they're still negotiating, and I think it's in a much better shape than old NAFTA. There is a question of what happens if you pass it or don't pass it. If you don't pass it, do you keep old NAFTA or do you have no NAFTA? I haven't been able to get a real straight answer on that question, so we don't really know what the ramifications of a vote would be. But we're waiting for a final version. Nothing has been submitted to Congress yet. And when it's submitted to Congress, then we'll deal with it. You can't consider a trade deal that hadn't even been in Congress. It hasn't been submitted to Congress. So when it's submitted, we'll deal with it. But they're still working out some of the details.
All right, so it sounds like when the details get settled, you would be in favor of, I guess, evaluating it and trying to get the USMC.
I've told people I'm uncommitted. I could vote for it. I might vote against it. Let's see what the final version looks like.
That's fair. That's fair. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Congressman Bobby Scott. He's a chairman on the Committee of Education and Labor. He is a Democrat. He represents the 3rd District of Virginia. Congressman Scott, let's get to guns. I am in favor of a gun compromise that would include a federal closure of the universal background check loopholes that I think are ridiculous. I just can't see anybody justifying that. Why have a background check if you don't close the loophole? That just renders the whole thing ridiculous. I mean, it's not enforceable. So I'm in favor of that. I'm also in favor.
Well, you and about 80% of the American public.
Yeah, I mean, because it's logical, right? It's common sense. I mean, if you're going to have a background check, have a background check.
Well, I agree with you, and unfortunately, that was to be considered on a state level in the General Assembly. Governor Northam called the General Assembly back on a straight party line vote. The Republicans voted, and this is with one vote margins in both the House and the Senate. They voted straight party line to not do anything and just go home. It was shocking because I was in the wake of the Virginia Beach tragedy, but hopefully we'll consider legislation. We've had problems on a pretty much party line vote with the Republicans since all along, and we saw it big time after Sandy Hook. After Sandy Hook, dozens of elementary school children, bodies riddled with assault weapon bullets. After that, we formed a task force, a House task force, to see what we could do. We couldn't get any Republicans to participate. So we met anyway and came up with a list of things that were possible. Some can pass, some might pass, some might be defeated, but at least we have a list. The assault weapons ban, the size of the magazine. The guy in Dayton had a magazine I understand could hold 100 bullets.
He had
when you go
two. They're
limited to 3 bullets in the magazine because we want to protect the ducks.
He had 200 mag
when
drums.
You're hunting people, you can have as many bullets as you want.
Look.
Then the background check, mental health services, and crime prevention generally are all kinds of things that we think we can do, and it's just a matter of addressing it and see if we can come up with something that can get a majority of the House Senate signed by the president.
Well, I think you need to do that. Also, I'm in favor of extending the red flag laws, assuming there's due process. And the argument I get from the gun lobby on the other side of it is it's an infringement of your rights, et cetera. Look, if you want to go get a restraining order against your ex-spouse or your ex-significant other or somebody that's harassing you, how do you get a restraining order? You take it in front of a judge, you plead for it, you get it for 72 hours, then you have a hearing. Then the party you want to get a restraining order comes in, and then a judge decides it. You can do the same thing with red flags. If you're crazy, if you're posting things on social media that include who you're going to kill and who you're going to rape, as the murderer did in Dayton, somebody explain to me why that person should be, one, be able to buy a weapon, and number two, be able to keep it if he has it when he's posting stuff that obviously he's nuts, right? This doesn't make any sense.
I think you started off with the real key to that legislation, and that is due process, because it cannot be a casual process. People are entitled to their constitutional rights, and if you're going to take their firearms, you have to have a rigorous due process. And if you can figure that out, then I'm all for it. But you have to be very careful on the question of due process. And we're going to be considering that when we come back. There's a lot of stuff, the Older Americans Act and surprise billing is an issue. Those are two areas where we might actually get some bipartisan cooperation. The Older Americans Act, that's Meals on Wheels and other nutritional programs, transportation services for senior citizens, is up for reauthorization, and hopefully we do have bipartisan support for that. And surprise billing, if you go to the emergency room and in an in-network hospital where your insurance company is participating, and one of the providers, an anesthesiologist, the radiologist, is not in network, they can, under present law, the best we can determine, send you a bill for whatever number they want to make up. They want to charge you $500, $5,000, $10,000. Apparently they have the right to do that, and they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And people get these surprise bills, think they were in the hospital, in network hospital, and get these huge bills. There's bipartisan support to do something about that. Because when you get one of these bills, if you don't pay it, they can report the non-payment to the credit agency,
mm-hmm.
ruin your credit.
Mm-hmm.
There's strong bipartisan support to do something about that. Exactly what is a little murky, but things like that. We're working on the Higher Education Act. People, I think the previous speaker talked about the tuition. One of the problems with the tuition is that the states aren't paying what they used to pay.
Mm-hmm.
30, 40 years ago, the states used to pay 2/3 of the cost of a state college.
Mm-hmm.
Students would be responsible for the other third, and the Pell Grant would almost cover that. The Pell Grant would cover 75%, so everybody could go to college. Now the Pell Grant only covers 25%, and states are paying on average about 1/3. Going from 2/3 to 1/3 doubles the cost of the student right there before you get to inflation. And then a lot of colleges in Virginia, the state isn't even paying the 1/3. So we need to get, we were going to consider the Higher Education Act and try to get tuitions more reasonable and much less reliance on student loans. The criminal justice system is obviously in need of repair,
right.
And we're slowly working to get away from the slogans and sound bites,
right.
and into the actual evidence and research.
Right.
And there's one other issue that we are working on. That's the Bush-Lewis Act, which passed the House and hopefully be considered in the Senate. There are many pension programs that are going broke,
mm-hmm.
and will have a devastating effect not only on the people that will lose their pensions, but also on the federal budget. You've got over 1 million people could be out of their pension, pay less income tax, use more Medicaid and social services. And we have calculated that if we don't do something, 10-year cost to the federal budget, ignoring the pain and suffering in losing your pension, the hit to the federal budget could be as much as $170 billion or more. And we have a solution in Bush-Lewis that's cost $60 billion in anticipated costs, much less than doing nothing. And hopefully we can save the pensions and save the taxpayer over $100 billion in the next 10 years.
Have you guys ran that?
There's a lot of stuff on the agenda.
Have you guys ran that by the White House, Congressman Scott?
I think the solution is going to be, the question is going to be, what is your solution? Because doing nothing
right.
is the stupidest thing on the
right.
table. That's a $170 billion initiative, doing nothing. Doing something can cost $60 billion. Now, if they have a better idea, something you can do that doesn't cost as much or do it a little different, fine, let's come up with it. But it's getting worse every day. Every day we do nothing, they're more likely to go broke. And the first number you start off with is, if you do nothing, what are we on the hook for?
Mm-hmm.
And what's your response? You can't. If your response is nothing, your solution is $170 billion. I'd like to. We have a solution. We have confidence in. CBO has scored it at about $60 billion over long-term costs.
Well, Congressman,
much
I would
less
think
than doing nothing.
I would think if you could get that in front of President Trump, he's going to be very favorable to that. That would be my prediction, just knowing him as I do. I mean, he's very sensitive to pensions and what he calls the pact that Americans have made with either their company or their government, whether it be Social Security or social net system or anything else. So I would think you would find a favorable ear there in trying to get real bipartisan legislation on those pensions passed with the White House.
What the solution is, I'm esoteric about what the solution is. If you have a better solution,
Right.
I'll support that. But we have to do something
Right.
to protect people's pensions, if for no other reason that we're on the hook for $170 billion if we do nothing.
All right, let me just ask you something before we take off, because I'm in agreement with that, and I'll certainly get behind it in any way that I can through my network and jawboning. But let me ask you this. You're my congressman. I respect you tremendously. I think you know that. And you're a common sense guy. I mean, the first time we met in your office, you pulled out a bunch of charts and were telling me about the budget. I mean, you had all the facts and figures, and that was some time ago. What do you think of this squad and some of the things that your colleagues are saying about Israel, some of the anti-Semitism, the really progressive left-wing stuff? How do you respond to them, Congressman?
Well, they're all new members, and some of the things they've said, they've had to apologize for, and I don't think they are. The leadership in the Democratic Party is not for freshmen. It's Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and the Democratic caucus.
You.
And that's the leadership of the party. And I'd like to focus on issues rather than personalities. I mean, the back and forth between squad members and the president is basically consists of name calling. And, we mentioned a lot of issues. Minimum wage is still pending, criminal justice, the Butch-Lewis Act on pensions, higher education, Older Americans Act, health care generally, and surprise billing particularly. You mentioned gun safety. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the table that we need to focus on. And I think when you start getting into name calling, it's just a distraction.
Well, that's because, Congressman, you're the chairman of the Committee on Education and Labor. We've only got a couple more minutes here with Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat, 3rd District, Virginia. And you're working on real legislation that matters. But if you go and have a press conference today in Washington and you announce it on the legislation, common sense stuff that you just outlined on my show, 3 people would show up. They, on the other hand, have a press conference to blast Israel and throw out anti-Semitic rhetoric, and they get on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and they get 50 media people to show up from the New York Times on down. So, I mean, that's a problem you guys have got.
You're in the media. You fix it.
I don't want. Look, I'm not putting them on. Who do I? I don't have the squad on my show. I have Bobby Scott on my show.
I can trying to focus on issues, and you're absolutely right. It's boring when you're getting into name calling. You get a lot of media attention, but I think if we're going to get something done, you just have to do the best you can. Relegate it to dealing with the issues. Just do the best you can. That's what I've been trying to do.
I've only got one response to that. You know what it is? Bobby Scott for Speaker of the House. That's my response. If you were Speaker, none of this would happen. You'd show the leadership. The problem is the leaders that you mentioned are afraid of these people, and so they let them throw out their anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic diatribes out there, and they don't do a damn thing. Hey, when the guy from Iowa, right, your colleague Steve King in Iowa, says crazy stuff, the Republican leadership threw him off the committees. You've got Omar Ilan sitting on the floor.
Yeah, but that was after he had been saying crazy stuff for at least a decade.
Well,
I mean, this kind of stuff that Steve has been talking.
Crazy stuff.
That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. He had been saying things like that for about a decade, and they finally got around to doing something. Steve King is not the Republican Party.
Exactly.
I would like members of the Republican Party.
He's not the Republican Party. He doesn't represent, and he doesn't represent. He doesn't represent our agenda. He doesn't represent the President's America First agenda.
And the squad doesn't represent. I mean, when they take a position, they don't and call a vote on something. The last time they took a position was on one of the immigration bills. They were the only 4 Democrats to vote no.
Yeah, but the difference is they're sitting on the Foreign Relations Committee, and Steve King is sitting in his office without a committee. That's the difference. The Republicans took action. You guys don't take action.
That was after about 10 years.
It doesn't matter. It's still done.
That would, yeah. Well, 10 years from now, maybe we'll take them off committees. But
you need to be the speaker. Then you would fix it.
But you can't say that Steve King had been saying things like that for about a decade.
Yeah, well, now he's out, and he's going to get beat in a primary. I got to go.
The squad does not represent the leadership in the Democratic Party, as I indicated, the Speaker, Majority Leader, Whip, Caucus Chair, and Vice Chair, Assistant Leader. I mean, that's the Democratic leadership.
All right. Bottom line
you
is,
know what Democrats, with the position of the Democratic Party, it's articulated by our leadership.
I got to go. Bobby Scott rebukes the squad. That's fair enough. I appreciate that. Congressman, I look forward to seeing you and your family on Monday at your mom's house. Thank you for inviting us. I'll see you then. My Congressman Bobby Scott, Chairman, Committee on Education and Labor. He should be Speaker.